Hello everybody, this is Danny from Deep South Homestead on Porch Time again this morning. Uh, been doing a little bit of talking about the Great Depression and some of the things that went on during the Great Depression. And after looking at a lot of the comments, I've realized that a lot of people don't understand what the deal was. And they have no concept of how things were during that particular time and why it's such a big deal. But what I want to talk about today is a subject called the good old days. And that's what a lot of people call them. A lot of people call things the good old days. Now, it's sometimes the good old days is a misconception, but sometimes there's a lot of truth to the good old days. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about some of the things that people like me, my age, and look, those older than me actually remember. Now, if y'all hear noise in the background, it is raining. It has been raining for days. But I guess one of the first things I want to mention is one thing that was common during the period and the era in which we call the good old days was that people sat on porches. Now that used to be a common occurrence a long time ago. On Sunday evenings or after work in the evenings and stuff like that, especially in the summer times, people would sit on the porches a lot and just relax. Wasn't any TV for people to sit around. Well, there was television, but a lot of people didn't watch television because they weren't growed up spending all their time watching TV. There's a lot of speculation about sitting on the porch. Why a lot of people, they're like, well, what's so great about sitting on the porch? Well, it was a time of, of relaxation. And it was also a time, during that particular time, people visited on Sunday evenings. Lots of times on Sunday afternoon, people sat on porches, and those who wanted to visit would get out and ride around, and they'd visit people because they was always out sitting on the porch. You could count on them been out sitting on the porches on Sunday afternoons. That's because everybody was just relaxed. Everybody's life was just kind of easy. It was their way of relaxation. During the good old days, there were things like old time remedies were used a lot. Grandma had all these concoctions. When I was growing up, my grandma and my mama and different ones, Dr. Tishner's. I don't know if any of y'all remember Dr. Tishner's or not, but to them, Dr. Tishner's was a remedy for anything. And castor oil and stuff like that. Once a year, you got a dose of castor oil, whether you wanted it or not. There were things like this, these old-time remedies that Vicks salve, if you got a chest cold, your Vicks salve was rubbed on your chest and you were put down. You weren't allowed to go outside, or they put it on your sinus passages right up here to open your sinuses all up, stuff like that. We had products like Ginseng Violet. If you had a sore in your mouth or something, boy, your mom would swab your mouth down with Ginseng Violet, and boy, you hated it when you went to school because you'd have purple all over the edge of your lips or something or other. But back then, it wasn't no big deal because everybody knew what it was, and they didn't make fun of you because they'd have it at some point also. But things like that. We think about those things when you're older and you sit back and you look at, man, how things has changed. I don't even know if you can still buy Ginseng Violet. There's things like that. I guess you can still buy Vicks salve and different things. We had these things that called vaporizers. You would put a vaporizer in a room and you'd put a little bit of Vicks salve in it and you'd fill it full of water. Well, it just filled the room full of a heavy moisture, or people put a towel over their head and they would actually sit there and breathe the vaporizer and help clear up their sinuses and break stuff up in their chest and all that kind of stuff. Well, you just don't see that kind of stuff happening anymore. People go, oh my God, I don't want a vaporizer in my room putting out all that moisture. Can you imagine what the moisture on all the furniture in my room would be? Well, we just lived plain back then. Didn't anybody really have that to worry about, But those were, that's some of the things that we that happened, and I guess I kind of sit and I think about not only those kind of things, but during the 50s and 60s and stuff like that, people loved their cars. I mean, cars were classics. I mean, you got to realize we had gotten out of an era of a primitive looking automobile, and boy, the 50s and 60s come around, man, they had some cool looking vehicles, the old Studebakers and the 57 Chevys and 55 Chevys, and all the coupes and all this kind of stuff that was around. And now people, they pay through the nose for these vehicles because they just love them. They're classics. And in the 60s, I remember the Corvettes and the Camaros and the Road Runners and all these kind of cars. Everybody was really into their automobiles during that time. Today people, if they don't have all the bells and whistles on it, you don't even have a key anymore. You just got something in your pocket. You get close to the car, you can push a button and crank it. What's up with that, guys? What happened to our cars had real frames under them. They had real bumpers on them. Stuff like that. All that kind of stuff's kind of gone by the wayside now, and ride around these cars is 90% electric and run on a little bit of gas, or they got so many gadgets hooked up on the motor to make them save gas that, that it's just pathetic as to, I don't know. It just seems a little pathetic to me. Now I know we're trying to save fuel, and I'm not trying to get into that, but along with these cars, people get out on Sunday evening. Now they're proud of them cars. They get out on Sunday afternoon and go for rides. They ride up and down the roads everywhere. And they would just, people see the new car. Well, oh my God, did you see what so and so just bought? They just bought them a new car, man. Wow, look at that. And they were just cool made. I mean, they just looked cool. So Sunday rides and cars and stuff like that, were just a thing of the past, and the reason people would do that is back in the good old days, things were closed on Sunday. You didn't hardly ever see a store open on Sunday. You were responsible enough that you knew that if you was gonna get out and ride on Sunday, you went ahead on Saturday and you went ahead and got the car all gassed up and stuff like that, because nothing was open on Sunday. They didn't nobody go to restaurants on Sundays, and restaurants were all closed. Grocery stores were closed. I mean, everything was closed. It was just a day of rest. Everybody picked that day, and and I'm not going to get into the biblical side of everything, about Sabbaths and stuff like that, but it was just a day set aside for everybody to rest, and that's what they did. Now, people went to Grandma's house on Sundays and Saturdays. Saturday was usually a work day, though, most places, but people went to Grandma's house on Sundays, and it was always a special time when you went to Grandma's house. After church, everybody went to Grandma's house. Grandma had a big old meal cooked, and that was what she loved doing. And everybody sit around, family fellowship, and talk and stuff like that, and everybody just loved going to Grandma's house. Now, the thing about the good old days is there was a lot of good family shows. Now, I'm not a big TV person, but back in the day, I did watch some TV, and there was just good shows. People could watch. I mean, Andy Griffith, Leave It to Beaver, My Three Sons, and things like this. They weren't all these action TV programs. There wasn't anything vulgar, or no foul language was used. Just good family shows. A lot of comedy. Three Stooges, and cartoons was a lot different. Bugs Bunny and the Road Runner, and Foghorn Leghorn and Coyote, and and different things like that. I mean, I wasn't allowed to watch cartoons because I had to work all the time, but I remember my brothers and sisters sitting around watching these things, and wasn't all this animated stuff, and just these weird cartoons. There just wasn't a lot of that back then. People were more realistic, and the cartoons made a little bit of sense, and they were funny, and I guess kids enjoyed that. But television, for the most part, was just clean. Now, if there was anything coming on, it was kind of sleazy. It was after midnight usually, and even way a little bit further on back, even movies like Gone with the Wind. I mean, people like Clark Gable had to get permission to make one phrase in that movie. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. They had to get a lot of permission just to be able to put that in a movie. And then there was a lot of people even still boycotted that movie because of that one phrase that was in there. But man, watch TV now. All you see is 4-letter words used in it all the time. It was just a different time in history. Dating, dating was a lot different in the good old days, so to speak. When you dated, you usually, for several dates, you would sit on the front porch when you went to court somebody. Y'all would sit on the front porch in a swing, a lot like what I'm doing right here. You'd sit on there with your girl, and y'all would talk, and nothing kind of got out of hand or anything like that. Or you'd ask to date. A lot of communities had dances, and you would go and ask. It'd be all right if you took her to a dance in town. And you'd have her back at a decent hour, and things like that. Dating wasn't all this jumping in vehicles and going everywhere. It wasn't until actually in probably the mid to late 50s that people actually began to start going to the drive-ins and stuff like that. And on up into the 60s, I went to drive-ins a lot with myself, but dating was just different back then. You didn't have to worry about the kids. There's usually, might be a little bit of mischief going on, but there wasn't anything that was detrimental. It wasn't getting in any kind of massive trouble or anything. And it seemed like things just changed in the dating world. People just date differently. Now kids go spend all their time at a mall, and you don't know what they're being exposed to and all that kind of stuff. And the good old days, things were just a lot simpler. Courting was just a little bit different back then. And in the good old days, it was just like any other time, I guess. There was always disease. Every generation has its problems with things, what we call the good old days, my era. There was, and before me, people were dealing with polio. The polio outbreak had become a big issue during that particular time. But you know what? There was disease, but yet there were cures being made because people were indulging their lives into finding out ways to cure things, and they did. They found a cure for polio. Boy, did that set the world off, because lots of doctors lost their practices, universities lost their funding, lots of places shut down that was doing research on polio and stuff like that because they found a cure for it. Then came the thing that our country passed a law by the Senate, and I did know the number, but I don't quite remember it right now. There's a law in the Senate that says it's illegal to cure any diseases all in this country anymore. That's why we don't have a cure for cancer. There's cures for cancer out there, but our country won't allow it because when you have a cure, then what you do is you shut down big pharma and you shut down all of the universities, the research centers, all the cancer centers would be shut down, all this kind of stuff. There'd be such a loss of revenue there that our government won't allow it to happen. So that's one of the sad things about modern life is that there could be cures, but they won't allow it. And in the good old days, people really sought to help one another like that. They worked for the betterment of mankind, I guess you might say. I guess you might say things was a little bit different then. You had things like fads that took place, bobby socks and rolled up jeans and t-shirts and stuff like that. That was all the greased down hair look, all this kind of stuff. Every generation has its way of doing things. There's no different in the good old days. Guys wore their blue jeans rolled up, and girls wore the bobby socks, and you had the Oxford shoes, and different things like that. That was just kind of marks an era in human history, I guess you might say, as far as dress is concerned. And the good old days, that's what people would try to wear, and try to. They were trying to find their niche in society, I guess. Be different, look a certain way, things like that. That was always pretty interesting. And then, when the '60s came along and getting into the early '70s, they become this big thing about what's too short to wear. The mini skirts came out. Things like that. And people were freaking out about bathing suits and all this kind of stuff. See, in the good old days, everybody's modest, man. You just didn't do certain things. You had things like Marilyn Monroe came out, very scantily dressed, people said, and things, and they were kind of like freaking about the young ladies. You could see their ankles and stuff like that, and their dresses began to go a little higher, and moms and dads were, you're not wearing that, because there was always a code of ethics in the house in the good old days. You had to be modest, and you didn't show too much skin and stuff like that. And boys, things change today. Now you no telling what you're liable to see somebody wearing. You go out and, man, things that's allowed nowadays, boy. When I was coming up as a kid, you wouldn't be dare caught in that kind of stuff outside of the household. People used to wear petticoats and bloomers and all this kind of stuff underneath their clothes. Guys, modestly dressed. Women were modestly dressed, and it just when you saw something different, you was like, boy, now they come from a loose family or whatever like that. People would say things like that because in the good old days, a lot of modesty. A lot of modesty in that. But, during this particular era in history, what we call the good old days, there was the American dream. There was a belief that if a man worked hard, he could buy land, he could own a home, have children, cars, vacations, pensions, all this kind of stuff. You could have all these things, and people worked toward that goal, and it was achieved by a particular generation of people there. They actually achieved this, and people loved country during that time, and they were very patriotic people during that time. You see a lot of guys in the, everybody went and signed up for going to service because, man, that's just the thing to do. If you was a man, that's what you went and done. You didn't have people running away, dodging the military and all that kind of stuff because everybody wanted to serve their country. Because their country, man, you had freedom here. You could own something in this country. And that kind of stuff is kind of falling by the wayside now a little bit. Still a lot of patriotic people in the country, though, don't get me wrong. But during the good old days, it just seemed like guys would sit around and talk about, man, as soon as school's over, man, we go into the Army or we go into the Marines or whatever. The guys were just excited about joining the military to protect their country. And that was something that that you saw during the good old days. Now, during the good old days, things were built to last. That's something we don't have nowadays. We live in a microwave society today. Back in the good old days, shoes were made to last. My grandfather was a cobbler. You buy a pair of shoes last you for years. Something went wrong with it, the sole started wearing a little bit, maybe the heel got wore a little bit, you scuff the side of it, you take your shoe to my grandpa, or you ladies these high heel shoes. My grandpa was constantly working on ladies' high heel shoes. He'd put new tacks in the bottom of that little long pointed heel sticking down. He'd fix all that and put them a new knob on the end of it and fix her shoes. And sometimes shoes would shrink and fit your feet just right. He could stretch them, make them work right. They was all made out of leather and stuff like that. And he'd go in and repair the soles on, put new soles and stuff like that on shoes. And things just made to last. And if you don't believe me, just look around and you still see a lot of classic automobiles from the 40s, 30s, 40s, 50s, all that kind of stuff. Them vehicles are still around because they made to last. And nowadays, nothing's made to last anymore. You know, you buy a pair of shoes, wears out, you throw it away. And that's just the mentality. Clothes were made to last. You know, clothes, you wear a pair of clothes for years. And they didn't wear out. They're made out of good material, good thread. Stuff nowadays has got such a blend of products in it that they don't hold up. They start fading. They do this, they do that. And, you know, if you had to wash them the way our grandparents washed, they'd come apart probably within a week. And so we see that there's lots of things just made to last. I collect a few antique things here and there to use on the homestead here. I rebuild a lot of them because they made to last. You can rebuild them. Everything was rebuildable. Back then, things just weren't. Nobody threw nothing away. You bought something, you wanted it to last. Farm equipment and stuff like that. All that kind of stuff is, you know, it's just made to last. I guess is all I can say. During the good old days, what we call that, you know, people were more patient. You know, that's one of the things I talk about during the Depression videos, that when they had food lines and soup lines and stuff like that, people were they were more patient. They'd stand and wait. They weren't all this, you know, hollering and screaming, and nobody wasn't cutting up. And if you got in line, you just stood there because you was thankful to have what you had. You know, and to be able to get what you could get, you was able to get some commodities or something like that. You was excited about being able to get that. So the mentality of people was they were just a little bit more patient people back then. There was a slower pace of life. People just lived a slower pace of life. Everybody wasn't in no big hurry, you know. Automobiles only drove a certain speed. There wasn't, you know, people weren't jet setting all over the world and having to be here, having to be there all of a sudden. You know, they just a slower pace of life. People a lot happier because things were just slower. And people sat around the table and ate dinner. You know, that's one of the strange things. People look at you today and they go, people nowadays into fast food restaurants and going out to eat and all that kind of stuff. Well, people sat around the table, usually on the weekends and at dinner time at night. You got home from work, you know, the meals were fixed. The whole family sit around the table and they carried on conversation. Believe that. People really talk to each other. Wow. Isn't that a freaky thing? Nobody's sitting here texting one another or messaging somebody, you know. I was face to face. You know, you actually you looked at somebody when you talked to them. Boy, God, imagine that today. Man, that freaks some people out. They have to look at somebody while they talk to them. They're so used to looking at a phone and a screen that most of our social skills have depleted to the point where, you know, there just isn't any social skills anymore. Another thing, you had to go inside and pick a phone up off the counter, and you had a cord attached to it. You wasn't going very far if you was going to talk to somebody. Imagine that. You couldn't talk to somebody freely. You know, you were limited about where you could talk to somebody at. You couldn't grab a phone, run out the door, and, you know, talk to somebody going down the highway. There wasn't no such thing as texting and driving or talking on the phone while you were driving or anything like that. It just didn't exist. Whoa. Those were the good old days. You know? You didn't have commercials on TV like don't text and drive. Stuff like that. Milk was delivered to your front door. Can you believe that? Had a milkman. You ordered milk every day. That milkman would bring the milk to your front door and drop the bottles off. You put your bottles out there. He dropped the new ones off to you. You know, pick them up, stuff like that. Oh, that's a concept that's gone out of existence, isn't it? There were mom and pop stores. You know, there was opportunities there if you had a little bit of a incentive about yourself. You could start your own business. You know, you could run a little mom and pop business there. People drop in. You know, rent wasn't really expensive. Bad. You could afford to do things. People people that patronize you, that's where we got a lot of our stores at. I mean, my town I live in here today, we still got one mom and pop store in it, and I patronize that store. I'll go there and I'll actually pay more for something than I will go into a box store. Just simply because these people have stuck it out. And I appreciate that. You know, kids had the freedom to go out and play at an early age. You could let your kids go out in the yard. You didn't have to worry about nobody getting them. Matter of fact, when I was a kid, 5 and 6 years old, 7, we'd go half a mile up the road to a neighbor's house. We'd go through the woods to a neighbor's house. We'd go down to the creeks. We'd do all kind of stuff, you know. We rode bicycles up and down the highways for miles and come back. And Mom didn't worry about us. You didn't have to worry about nobody taking a kid. You know, people respected one another. And so kids could go out at an early age and play. Imagine that. You could let your kid go outside and didn't have to worry. Man, this thing's changed. It's just amazing to me how things are today. You could actually get fresh produce that you didn't have to worry about chemicals or chemicals being sprayed on it heavy from a farmer. You could actually go to the grocery store and get produce, and you didn't have to worry about chemical enhancements being used on it, all those kind of things. You know, your farmers markets were truly farmers markets. Now, they were some people. My daddy, I remember telling me that during one particular point in history there that they had a blight started hitting the cucumbers, and they had to use some arsenic on it and stuff like that. And they would go out and put those kind of chemicals on them to keep the bugs from eating them up. But on an average, most farmers, small-time farmers, didn't use a lot of chemicals. You know, and if you bought some kind of pre-mixed food from the grocery store or something like that, it wasn't loaded with enhancements and chemicals and stuff like that. It was usually just a product. Now, it didn't have a long shelf life, but people didn't buy stuff to have long shelf lives. Company wasn't worried too much about that at that time when groceries first started being put on shelves. They were just interested in selling their product. And it wasn't until later on that they started radiating everything and putting all kind of chemical enhancers and all that kind of stuff in it. So, yeah, the food system was a lot different back then. The good old days, land was affordable. Guys, at my age, I used to could buy land from $200 to $700 an acre. And yes, I could kick my behind for not buying more. But during that time period, you know, we just didn't have the money to buy a lot of stuff. And land was everywhere, you know, and there was plenty of land for sale. If anybody wanted land, you could always buy land. And boy, has things changed now. You know, in the good old days, that's just the way it was. It was just low prices, lots of land. And that's one thing in the homesteading community today that kind of, I guess it kind of bothers me, is the fact that we have a lot of people out there that wants to homestead, but they can't afford the land because everybody just wants too much money for it, you know. And I guess I'm going to close this thing down here by one last thing by saying that in the good old days, one of the things that we didn't have to worry about, crime rate was kind of low, and you didn't have to worry about a lot of crime. People didn't lock their doors. They left their windows open. You go to bed at night, you didn't lock your doors, things like that. You didn't have to worry about it because people were just more respectful during those times. Now, every now and then, you'd have somebody who'd want to try to do something, but usually if they did, they was dealt with, and justice was passed pretty swiftly, and examples were made, and crime rate was just low. Had a different mentality of people back then. People didn't try to take what wasn't theirs. People respected the fact that you slept with your doors unlocked. They didn't try to come in and mess with you, nothing like that. So guys, as I do the Great Depression era, and I talk about it, these are some of the things that I wanted to bring to y'all's attention, because there's a lot of people that ask, well, what's the big deal about the Great Depression era? Well, the big deal is this is the way life was years ago. And these are some of the things that made life enjoyable back then in the good old days. So take these things to heart and realize that life was different back then. So I hope you've enjoyed this morning on Porch Time. I look back into the good old days. And let me say this before I close here. The good old days for you is today. Because you'll look back when you get to be older, and you'll remember today, and today will be your good old days. So don't get hung up on the past. You live in the good old days for your age right now. Thank you from Deep South Homestead.